Good morning, Smart News. We wake up this Monday morning and the world has changed. The site of America's longest war has fallen into the hands of the exact people that America has spent 2 decades fighting. It's a lot to take in, and it is very much a developing story. And I found myself this weekend reflecting on all the different reporting I've done over the last 15 plus years. And I found myself looking at images that came to mind. Some of them I'm going to show you today. And just a warning, although most of my reporting I try to make sure everyone in the family can enjoy, there's some parts of it today that are going to be more difficult than others. One of the things that came to mind is a phrase that has come up time and time again. It's often attributed to the Taliban, but that's also under dispute. And the phrase says this: "You have all the watches, we have all the time." And it's used in many ways to to relate to foreign policy. That's how that phrase is often used, as almost a foreshadowing of what's to come. Afghanistan as a nation is known as the graveyards of empires because of the different wars that have been fought there. And the sentiment behind that is no matter how many resources are sent to this country, there's a timeline for others. And for the people in Afghanistan, and in specifics to this particular quote and the way that I'm using it to the Taliban, is that we'll wait. We're going to wait because we're committed to leading this country. You have all the watches, we have all the time. You'll hear that phrase again and again. So what I thought today is, how can we actually help you work through some of these headlines? And one of the things that's missing always is sort of that deep breath that allows us to step back as we're getting new headlines to build upon, almost like a little bit of a Lego set, right? We need a good foundation. So what I thought today is, let's go over a couple of the basics, bring you also some of the video that you're going to be seeing, a lot of the viral video. And also I want to share with you, again, this image that I think will be important to understand what we mean when the Taliban take control of a country. So last Monday, as we started off, I showed you this map, and I prefaced that report is that we needed perspective. This was the map of Afghanistan last Monday. The areas in red were the areas that had already fallen to the Taliban, and there was still a question about Kandahar in the south. When I look back on this map, I think to myself, there was a real warning there that I missed, and I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. Let's go ahead and show you just a big map of Afghanistan in general and a quick overview. You can see Afghanistan here, Pakistan to the south, Iran to the west, and you have a whole bunch of different countries kind of along the north. Afghanistan is a country of around 39 million people, roughly the size of California. Interesting fact to note, according to the CIA, Afghanistan has changed its national flag more times than any other nation in the 20th century. So that gives you an idea. Interesting enough too, August 19th, a few days from now, is Independence Day in Afghanistan, when in 1919, the Afghan government at the time essentially declared independence from Britain. They had diplomatic relations with Britain. And so think about that timing. August 19th, just a few days away. Think about how that kind of pulls in to what we're seeing now with the Taliban taking over the Afghan government. Let me show you what the map looks like now, so we can have an idea of what actually has transpired over the last week. This is a map courtesy of the BBC. It's cut off a little bit, but you can see the map that's to the left here is what Afghanistan looked like in July. And here's what Afghanistan looked like over the weekend, all the red showing the Taliban in control. I think at this moment that this map was taken, there was a blue area for Kabul, but we know Kabul now has fallen to the Taliban. So why do I say that there should have been a warning? Let me go ahead and go back to this big map. When we saw some of the northern cities fall to the Taliban, I think this is probably the best map to go back to. You know, if you look along the border of Pakistan, these are the areas that are traditionally thought, these are the tribal areas that are referred to often. You might hear people reference that, the tribal areas of Afghanistan. This is the border with Pakistan, this porous border. And this was always the border in question where Taliban fighters, Al-Qaeda sympathizers would pass back and forth. So if I said to you, you know, the Taliban are taking cities along Pakistan, the Pakistan border, you know, there almost could be a like a quiet resignation. Yeah, well, this is a tribal area. This is where there's a lot of dominance there. Oh yeah, along the south. Yeah, these are areas that are really hot spots for the Taliban. The North was not necessarily that. And in fact, back in 2001, the North was helpful to the Americans in trying to defeat the Taliban at the time. So that should have been a warning sign that we're seeing something different here, that the Taliban are encircling Kabul, which is the main capital, obviously. A lot of you are seeing what's happening in Kabul today, and I have some video. I'm sure some of you are seeing this as well. As I was just getting on this live, we're getting more reports that there are more casualties. Casualties, by the way, refer to injuries as well as deaths, but in this case, I'm using it referencing deaths. That this is an American plane that's trying to take off, and you can see that people are jumping on the plane here. And in fact, they're one of the few news networks, 24-hour news networks in Afghanistan, which was a really big deal when it launched. Also shared this video on their Twitter feed. You don't see too many graphic images here, but this video was used as saying that there were people hanging on to the plane as it was taking off. There's been a huge disruption at the airport that was supposed to be secure. Why do people say that this is the Saigon moment? You've heard this again and again, the Saigon moment. Well, I wasn't around in 1975, and I didn't know the Saigon moment that everyone was talking about. Of course, I've heard of it before, but in the reference of exactly how is it being used right now. So let me just show you this picture that's floating around in social media. To the left is what happened in Vietnam, 1975, an evacuation of American staff and allies there. And you can see this was the largest helicopter evacuation in American history because they couldn't land a plane. What you're seeing on the other side with this larger helicopter is what was happening in Afghanistan, trying to evacuate the embassy. So this is why there's references to Saigon, because of the image of this, of the rapid evacuation of the Americans and the desperation of the people to try to get out as well. Right now, there is no clear path out of Afghanistan. There's no clear path right now. The airport, there's no domestic flights landing. The borders are closed to the Taliban are in control. There's checkpoints. So there's no way, easy, obvious way out. And by the way, it's not just Americans that are trying to get out. We know that there's also the allies to the Americans that have been working, now let's say you're working with the American government. You could be working with the American government 10, 15, 20 years. You've put in your time. Maybe you're working with NATO allies. Remember, this wasn't just an American mission. Of course, that's where the focus should remain, right? We went into Afghanistan after 9/11. We were fighting the Taliban that gave safe haven to Al-Qaeda. This is the reason we were there. We're part of NATO, a huge alliance. When someone in NATO goes to war, everybody in NATO goes to war. And that's why European countries also have a presence in Afghanistan. There was a report out of Germany today that Angela Merkel was saying she has thousands of people to get out of Afghanistan. This is a really big deal. And so far, the question is, how are the Taliban going to handle this? What is this going to look like? So here's just the image that I want to share with you. The question of what Afghanistan would look like if America ever left was a question that's been entertained for years, a decade now. And one of the most salient, powerful images ever put out on the world stage to say, these are the stakes, is this one by Time magazine. I'm sure you've seen this before. This was in 2010, almost 10 years to the date of when we're talking right now. This was the end of July 2010. What was the question that Time magazine was asking? What happens if we leave Afghanistan? This young woman was 18 years old. She was married to a man. She said his family abused her and she attempted to run away. The Taliban were in control and they took her to a nearby hillside and they chopped off her ears and her nose and left her to die. That's what they did. That's what happened to her. That is Taliban rule. This is why people are afraid. We're sometimes not using very specific language. We're using, these terms. We don't want to show graphic images. This is why this magazine cover was such a big deal. This is Taliban rule. This is why the women are afraid. This is why there's fear in Afghanistan about what the Taliban could do, what they're saying versus what they could do. This is why there was questions about having any negotiations with the Taliban. This is why there's questions why the Taliban is not designated a terrorist organization, which we'll talk about in just a moment. This is the reason. This is what we were fighting in a lot of ways there. I know it's controversial, but she was able to come to the United States. She was actually able to have some surgery. Read one article on her today that said, she had a prosthetic nose, but she decided at times, she didn't want to wear it anymore. This was her story. So it'd be interesting to check in with her now. I reached out to the photographer who took that photo. I think we should talk to her too. So those photos, and there's some real powerful references from that article. Oftentimes when I do my reports, one of the problems I have with the news is sometimes it's like intentionally too salacious and graphic. But I thought to myself, would I show my 5 or 6 year old that photo? That's why I wanted to give you a warning. I want them to understand evil. I want them to understand what we're talking about. That's a lot to take in. But that's what we need to understand. That's what's going on with the Taliban. So Al-Qaeda is designated a terrorist organization. The Taliban hasn't, even though the Taliban has worked closely with Al-Qaeda. Just recently, former National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster, just wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal. He said there's no difference between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. We can try to, rationalize it. There's not, and we need to understand it. In the past, the reason why the United States said that the Taliban weren't a terrorist organization was because they didn't make an outward threat to attack America. But there are those that argue that their existence, which is antithetical to any freedoms or liberties that America talks about and stands for, is the reason why they're not an ally. They're certainly not an ally. The thing is if you label someone a terrorist organization, America says we don't negotiate with terrorists. Well, we've been negotiating with the Taliban for years. And what will be really interesting, I just saw a headline, the CENTCOM commander, or what is CENTCOM, Central Command of the U.S. military, looking at this entire region, said that he had some communications with the Taliban. That's really important. That's at a high level. The U.S. President Biden, is scheduled to speak today, depending on where you are in the country. It'll either be mid-afternoon for you around 3:45 Eastern time, 12:45 Pacific, and it'll be interesting to hear what he says. How have the United States communicated? Do we have complete open dialogue with the Taliban? That would be important. That would be important to know. So a lot to watch as this is developing. But those are a few key points that I wanted to share with you today. So we have an idea of the geography, where this is, where we're talking about in the world, how big the country is. Why are people making these references to the past? Why that historical reference to Saigon? Well, that's the reason why. You saw some of the images. Looks very familiar. And of course, what is the Taliban? Who are the Taliban? That's something I'm going to be digging in more to try to give you very specifics. Where did they come from? Where was the rise? What do we need to know? Some of you have asked, because you know that my husband is a veteran, how he's felt about this, and I'll share his thoughts. He just had an initial thought. Obviously, there's a lot of different thoughts. He did not deploy directly to Afghanistan to do a combat mission. Most of his combat missions, all of them, were in Iraq. And as a member of the SEAL team, executive officer of a Navy SEAL team, he had men in a lot of different areas of the world. As a wife of a veteran, I was very interested in foreign policy before I married my husband. It's one of the things that brought us together. But I go back, and one of the things I say to you all the time is that foreign policy is personal. And anyone that tells you that's too complicated, so complicated, you deal with complicated things all your life. You can deal with complicated foreign policy. My question now is, we have spent 20 years at war. My husband has served. Many of your family have served. I'm looking at my sons, wondering what wars they're going to fight and what stage we're setting for the future. I want to show you this. This is taking us in a little different direction, but this is something also I reflected on. This is also very important. This is a cover from the Atlantic Monthly 2011, The Ally from Hell. What are they talking about? They're talking about Pakistan. Where was Osama bin Laden? Where was he hiding? He was in Pakistan. Where does the Al-Qaeda safe haven now, or the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, however they want to communicate, where do they operate from? The tribal areas of Pakistan. This has been a question for years. We give billions of dollars to Pakistan. And it's always been a question about what sort of an ally they are. And it's something that is a conversation probably not for today, but something that we're going to need to talk about in the future more. Can I answer any questions for you guys while we kind of work through some of the news? I know it's a lot to take in. And I appreciate the fact that we're sharing this time. Look at all the really historical moments that we shared together at Smarter News. Thank you for the honor to be able to report to you during this time. I really take it as an honor and a privilege. What did my husband say? I asked him yesterday, I said, you know what, he teaches leadership. He wrote a book, Extreme Ownership, How Navy SEALs Lead and Win. And one of the things the book does, and it forced him and his co-author to do, it was a hard process writing that book, because they had to go back to all the darkest times of their lives and also some of the greatest times of their lives. And his reaction yesterday when we were just talking, we just had a quiet moment, was what came to him is the ability, the importance of an honest assessment. How as leaders, we always have to have an honest assessment with ourselves about what the mission is and whether or not we're fulfilling that mission. And it's interesting to think about that in our own lives, isn't it? Having an honest conversation with the mission. We're not all going to war, but having an honest assessment of where we are and where we're going is important. Thank you. More throughout the day. As the president speaks, you know I'll grab the important sound bites for you. Anybody else will be watching the State Department as well as the Department of Defense. We are in touch with Holly McKay, amazing writer and journalist in Afghanistan. She is going to be doing some work with us this week. We want to keep up with Holly, see where she is right now. We're in contact, and she's safe, and she's trying to figure out her next steps. And a little update there. The name of the book, thank you so much, is Extreme Ownership, How Navy SEALs Lead and Win. We'll have Leif come on, and maybe we could do a little joint live with you at some point if it makes sense. But right now, what my priority is being of service to you. So whatever's important to you is important to me. Write the questions. I can do the reporting for you. We have the sources, we have the resources, and we can do this. So thank you again. I appreciate your time. I don't take it lightly. And more on this story, all of the video, all of the background, all of our sources, always back to smarternews.com, so you can have something to read a little bit more of, watch again, share with your friends if you'd like. It's all there for you. Have a great day. More on smarternews.com.